Faith TV, advancing kingdom lifestyle.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Gigi Report. I'm your host, Godfrey Gichuki, and I'm glad that you're watching tonight's show, wherever you're watching from. Maybe it's even daytime or wherever you are across the globe. Welcome to this show, and I believe you're going to learn a lot today. We are focusing on the question of the problem of developing Africa. How can intra-Africa trade develop Africa or contribute to Africa development? That's the issue we're dealing with today. And I'm pleased to have a special guest with me, Kezy Mukiri. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking forward.
All right. Very nice. My guest is absolutely amazing. I'm going to be introducing her father to us. And so let's begin from the beginning, as always. And make sure you remember to share with, if you're on the social media platform in particular, leave your footprint, subscribe to Elevate TV Kenya YouTube channel, Facebook page. Make sure you're engaged and leave your comments there. Tell us what you think about the show. And I believe we will be able to take this conversation forward. So let's begin from the beginning. I'm going to introduce, the key issues we want to delve into, and then I introduce my guest very briefly, and then we get the conversation underway. So join us. Now, for a long time, Africa development has been the focus of many global initiatives, given that Africa is home to the majority of the world's poorest communities and countries, for that matter. So the big question is, how do you develop Africa? And what's the role of intra-Africa trade? So those are the issues we're going to be focusing on. So welcome to the Gigi Report. As always, the Gigi Report is a platform for big and bold conversation, honest conversation on a broad range of subjects: social, cultural, economic, philosophical, theological, political issues. Today we are looking at economic issues and trade, obviously, and some of the other economic debates around that. Okay, now let me introduce our guest. My guest is Kezy Mukiri. She is the executive director of Ignite Trade Africa, and that's a business and trade consultancy firm. And Kezy is a trade lawyer and an entrepreneur, and she holds an MA in international relations and a law degree, LLB, from the famous University of Nairobi, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh, very good. So we are going to have this conversation. So I think we just better begin the conversation right away. All right? So I always like beginning at the beginning. So tell us about your career development and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you. And thank you for the privilege of having me on the show.
Yes.
So I grew up wanting to be a lawyer. It wasn't very clear what facet of the law that I wanted to practice, but I grew up wanting to practice law. Okay. And I did go to law school, did my master's in international relations, because I really wanted a world view, understand how countries interact with each other.
Okay.
And at the top point of doing that master's degree and graduating, I got this nudging feeling. And by then I was working in a law firm already, was also doing some work with the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission. And I got this bug to go into entrepreneurship.
Right.
And I veered off and founded a business.
Okay.
And that business was totally unrelated with the practice of the law. I was in conference management. And what it did was put me on a platform where I got to handle a lot of international conferences. Got to see, yes, countries relating with each other in the context of events, negotiating trade instruments, and I got to interact with entrepreneurs and deal with the pain points of businesses that are trying to go regional or to go global.
Yes.
And the challenges around that. And it all came together for me. I am grateful that I've journeyed the entrepreneurship journey, founding businesses, 16 years in enterprise development, working with different organizations, even helping to develop skills development programs for entrepreneurs. But in 2017, I founded Ignite Africa, that then works with SMEs like myself and exposes them specifically to regional markets.
Okay.
My experience in the practice of the law now, I'm also a partner at Mukiri Global Advocates, and Mukiri Global Advocates has such a keen interest in the trade and business aspect of the practice of the law. So it's not just the practice of the law, but it's how do you apply the law in the business and trade environments. Yeah, and let me also say that I'm very passionate about the internationalization of trade.
Okay.
Because I discovered, and I will talk about it, is that trade is such a catalyst.
For development.
For development.
Okay.
And sustainable development for that matter.
Okay.
Trade is a catalyst. Trade could be an equalizer. Of course, when we look at global dynamics, we wouldn't say that it has been an equalizer as far as Africa's relations.
Yes. I mean, if you look at the outcomes, obviously, the fact that there are disparities and differences and inequalities, and you know, the countries have fared differently historically, and Africa, like we began, is really like it's home to some of the poorest nations and regions in the world. So that itself is a major point of concern. Yeah. So I think that's a wonderful interest. So how was your early years? You know, when you began as a lawyer and you signed up, you were maybe after being admitted to the bar or something. I don't know whether you started practicing. No, yeah, you go to the bar first before you can appear in court at all. What is it like being a lawyer, and how long have you practiced, by the way? So that can put perspective to the journey. And do you still go to court?
Very interesting.
Yes.
This year marks 20 years since I left law school.
Okay.
And 17 years post-admission.
Okay.
So practicing law for the last 17, almost 18 years.
Okay.
I began as a litigation lawyer.
Okay.
The one that goes to the court and articulates the issue and walks away with a victory.
Okay.
And those are very exciting years. You know, I don't think there's any law courts, major law courts in this country that I've not been to.
All right.
Out in the counties, the resident magistrate courts, everywhere
You've
around.
been before almost all the judges.
And I can tell you, it was a delightful thing, you know, being out there practicing law and also connecting with the role of the law in the community. The law resolves issues.
Right.
The law can mend relationships or break them.
Okay.
You know, there is an interaction of the law that's beyond the books.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's what it was like. And for me, it was a fulfillment of a dream. I did not grow up thinking I could be this, I could be that, I could be that. I just wanted to study law.
Okay.
And be a lawyer. It was a fulfillment of a dream, and you know, it's connected so much with my purpose as an individual.
Let me dig a little bit on that.
Yeah.
Who exactly inspired you? Were you inspired at home? Were you inspired by just being out there or in high school or whatever? How did the dream formulate?
Do you know, it's very interesting because I didn't grow up with lawyers around me.
Okay.
At all. So I don't have a reference point to say, I saw so-and-so doing very well and I wanted to be like them.
Yes.
Same thing as entrepreneurship.
Yes.
I didn't have a reference. I did not grow up in a family that was highly entrepreneurial.
Right.
No, but I think my father especially kept saying in my arguments at home as a girl growing up, he would always say, listen to the lawyer, she has started speaking. This little lawyer, every time I would bring up a point and I would argue out my cause, the response of my parents would be, now here comes the lawyer.
So actually it's like you owned that space, you kind of like stepped into that space. Somehow, among the many things anybody would want to be, kind of like, I think I want to be a lawyer. And then it's like it began to flow out of you. And then your parents affirmed it. And then, and they started saying you're a lawyer. So, I mean, really, everything just came together and look, you went,
and Gigi, that's a side issue, but very important. I don't remember ever being told you can't be.
Okay.
I don't remember ever being told, no, that's not for you, or you can't be it.
Yes.
It was an environment that affirmed whatever it is you wanted to be.
Okay.
And there wasn't even like, you have to be this or you must be this. And I think it's a lesson for us even as we parent.
What exactly inspires you, your Africa development dream? Yes.
I look at the contradictions within this continent.
Okay.
So we have literature and, the studies that would tell us, of course, the vast majority of the world's poorest reside in Africa. We know that the LDCs, the least developed countries, and a good number of them are in Africa. But on the other hand, we know how resource rich this continent is.
Yes.
From the natural resources, but also human resource. We are such a resource-rich continent.
Okay.
And I can't help but marvel at the contradictions that are within these continents. The failure to exploit potential. The thing that we've put out there is that there's a lot of potential in Africa. And I always say, potential is not food. You can't serve potential on a plate and serve it to your children. Potential must be worked.
Yes.
So I got interested in what is this that has caused Africa to remain at this point where you have resources, but you cannot mine them. You will realize for the longest time when Southeast Asia was busy diversifying its economies, Africa was relying on rents from, companies, global firms that have leased our minefields, and we are being paid, rent. So there is resource on the continent. There is the potential, the capabilities, but it was not exploited. In 2015, I was a beneficiary of a fellowship, what is called the Young Africa Leaders Initiative by President Obama, the Mandela Washington Fellowship.
Yes.
And I spent 6-7 weeks in top universities in the US. And this program brought together top leaders, young African leaders across sub-Saharan Africa. And we sat in that environment, and I would look at the brilliant minds that were in that space, and they represented virtually every country in sub-Saharan Africa. And we would have, resource persons coming to talk to us about the continent, and we would look and think, that's theory. What is being portrayed, what is presented.
Some expert in Africa development from a university in the US, he studied everything he can get hold of about Africa development, but from there, and then he's telling us about what he thinks we should be doing and all that and all that.
Exactly. And I was fortunate to be in a group of young people who had a lot of like-mindedness, because we said, no, we have the real story of what Africa is and what the potential for Africa is. And that fellowship and that environment, the connections that I built across Africa, stirred up something in me. And I came back home and founded Ignite with Africa. Because that's the space I want to play. First of all, I'm very certain about my placement, that my play field is a continent of Africa. And I am passionate about what tool do I want to play, to use to play. For me, it's trade. That I understood that if there was a way to harness capabilities, harness our resources, participate in forums that you could voice some of the needs, even take deep dives into what exactly are the issues in the continent.
Exactly.
And then utilize platforms where we vocalize some of these issues, that we can play a role. We can play a role. So when I look at, those years that have passed, we have had Africa from the 60s, the 70s. You've always had a pioneering voice in the continent that is talking about regionalization, strengthening regional ties, building economic blocks in Africa. And yes, there's been some progress. We have our regional economic blocks. We have our RECs, like the East Africa Community, which Kenya is a member of, the COMESA.
We have COMESA.
But I do not think that Africa had ever gotten to where we are right now. I think we are in a season where there is a coalescing of ideas. A coalescing, it's like there's been momentum leading up to this moment. Even when it comes to trade opportunities, when it comes to maturing in our trade policy, I think we are getting there. We still have a lot of challenges, a lot of struggles, but I think we are living in an opportune moment for the continent of Africa.
Okay. Something leading up to that. I think this week, we are this week, third week of January, there is the Davos Global Economic Forum. The Global Economic Forum in Davos, Davos, I think, is the city in Switzerland. So these guys are there, chilling in that frozen country and talking about world economic, issues. Do you think that kind of global platform does a justice to raise the voice of Africa, or do you think perhaps Africa is really not doing enough to make its voice heard?
Trade at a global level must be seen, must be interpreted, must be read with the eyes of international politics in mind.
Yes.
At the global scale, you will not separate international politics from economics and trade.
Yes.
It's a battle of interests.
Okay. Yeah, you could say that, yeah. Battle of interests.
Yes.
So what goes on at Davos is battle of interest, and if Africa has to get a share of the pie, whatever it is that is going on, whatever issues are being negotiated, it's got to put its foot there.
You have to put your foot in there, but you have to understand how to utilize the platforms that come to you.
Okay.
That's a platform for articulation.
Yes.
Africa must coalesce around how it articulates its position on matters trade. But when it comes to safeguarding your interests, you have to know whether you're negotiating from an equal footing or not.
Actually, let's come to the details of that, because there has been a lot of people talking and trying to wrestle with those very, very many challenges. So let's be a little bit more specific. Tell us about trade and its role in development. I think you've talked about that. But what's being done to drive Africa trade? And I think one of the things you've said is there is a coalescing of efforts, perhaps policy, the regional blocks, I think, perhaps have strengthened. What else is going on in an effort to actually raise their capacity, the issues, the big issues that are leading up to, that should help Africa develop? So that's one question. The other question is, it's talking about, some of the, within Africa, like the trade agreements and what have you, so you can describe that. And then and also again, at the same time, maybe you could also talk about the challenges. So one of the things is the general mood and conviction that we can actually do it together as Africa. Maybe open up a little bit that real things that are happening right now, so that some of our viewers can actually know, yes, actually this is not just mere talk. There's a lot going on, very specific issues that are coming up, and then some of the opportunities that are emerging out of that.
Great. Historically, just backtracking a little bit, one of the biggest challenges around trade on the continent is the volumes of trade with one another as a continent, what we call Intra-Africa trade.
Yes.
If you compare Africa to other continents, you'd find like maybe around Europe at 60% or a little higher than that, Asia at maybe 40%. I don't know what the exact ratios are. But you find Africa at somewhere between 17%. The volumes of trade within the continent.
Across countries within Africa.
Within Africa.
Exactly.
We have not viewed each other as trading partners.
Okay.
We had not previously viewed each other as trading partners. So you would find Africa squabbling to negotiate trade agreements with countries in the West and monitoring what those trade agreements are. But if you look at the construction of many of those trade agreements, they are skewed, of course, in favor of countries. So we are generally have been producers, and we would export raw materials, which of course fetch a smaller price. They will fetch less on global markets, but in return we are importing finished products.
Exactly.
Which is not a good scenario for a balance of trade.
Exactly.
So you will find that we always, there is a trade deficit somewhere. So I think, first of all, is that thinking of who do you negotiate? Who are you trading with? I call it the what, the who, the how. What are you trading in? What are you trading in? We've had a mentality of, we consume. We would import products to consume. But we will export without putting value in the products that we generate.
That has been a problem of Africa, and maybe by Africans, let's put it that way, of African and by Africans, and that needs to be resolved.
That has to be resolved.
And it is within our domain, actually.
It is actually, and there are strategies around how do you resolve that.
Yes.
And that's the disconnect. The disconnect that there will be this exploitation, but you will only be exploited if you're incapable of not being exploited.
Yes.
So there was that. What are you exporting? Number two, who are you trading with?
Yes.
That failure to look inward and see a market of 1 billion people within the continent of Africa and find out how do we galvanize this market.
Okay.
The other thing is, how are you negotiating? When we negotiate as a bloc,
it's different.
It's different from small countries, landlocked countries, where somewhere in Central Africa trying to negotiate, certain trade.
Malawi trying to negotiate with the World Bank.
Exactly.
And IMF, and Kenya the same, individually, separately.
So there's been that, the what, the how, the who. What, how are you going about it? But I think beyond that, the selfish lack of political goodwill within the continent. Of course, there's been elements of divide and rule, but there was lack of political goodwill to harness the potential of Africa from within the continent. It's a scenario of being your own enemy.
Worst enemy, yes.
Yeah, being your own worst enemy. But where are we at? The highlight of the last few years, 2018, we had African countries signing the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Of course, it's come as a result of many efforts. And when we look at where the continent is and the potential that comes with the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, first of all, it has coalesced Africa as a market.
Okay.
1 billion people with a GDP of over $3 trillion US dollars. So when we put those numbers together, we start to see this is an actual market. We should actually be prioritizing trading with one another. Trade is a catalyst for development.
It's not enough just to talk about how Africa has been marginalized, while actually our destiny is in our own hands. And so you're saying, for example, that trade agreement, Intra-Africa trade agreement, signed up in 2018, really is like the answer. So let's forget about blaming everybody else for our misery, and let's focus on what can we do for ourselves. What are some of the challenges that have emerged out of that, if any, and how is that shaping intra-Africa trade at the moment?
Great. So coming to the signing of the Intra-Africa Trade Agreement, what we call the AFCFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, of course there was a lot of push and pull negotiating, bigger countries feeling like they will be disadvantaged. Just to backtrack, the real essence of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, number one, is reduced tariffs.
Okay.
Reduced tariffs on the export of goods. And eventually, incrementally, there will be a reduction of up to 90% of those tariffs, you know, which complicate how we trade with one another. But number two also is to deal with the issue of non-tariff barriers.
Right.
There are certain barriers that are not of a tariff nature, and we'll talk about them. And then thirdly is to liberalize trade in services. Trade in services is such a potent thing.
And by that, maybe just to jump in, we're talking about, say, like an African bank. So a bank headquartered, say, in Nigeria or Egypt or Sudan here, being able to offer services right here in our country.
Yes.
I mean, it's offering services, financial services, and, you know, letting them, you know, grow within Africa.
Yes.
Is that what you're describing?
Exactly that. And just to talk even about the financial services sector, because the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is broken into certain protocols.
Yes.
I'll talk about those protocols, but one of them is a protocol on services.
Yes.
The protocol on services has listed priority areas. Professional services, financial services, the tourism sector. Those are the priority areas where efforts will be put to see to it that we have eliminated barriers, we've opened up our borders, and that we are increasing our volumes of trade with each other. In the financial services sector alone, we have a new development that has recently been piloted in West Africa. It's called PAPS, Pan-Africa Payment System. You see, right now, if you want to export, you are dependent on the dollar, pushes and pulls with the dollar. So what happens is that you would have to go to a bank, you have to buy the dollar, then you have to pay whoever it is when you're importing. So I assume, for example, I want to export to Nigeria, I will send the product in Kenyan shillings to the dollar, but when the person receives payment, they're receiving it in the dollar, they have to convert it to the naira.
Yeah, exactly.
So Africa loses in excess of $1 billion every year on currency shifts.
Why not just get the naira, you know, shipped to Nairobi?
We have a solution.
And, you know,
we have the PAPS, which is now a payment gateway that will facilitate trade across, which means that I can pay my currency and you receive the payment in your currency.
Absolutely. Now we take a short break. I tell you, this conversation is flowing so well. I hope you're, you know, enjoying what we're talking about and also following keenly. Maybe you're a professional somewhere in some space that you're charged with this kind of developing African market. I think this is something to really pay attention to. And you can also reach out to my guest. You get contacts from us, and we'll link you up. Very good. So let's take a short break. Then when we come back, we're going to come back to this conversation, talk about developing Africa and some of the challenges and how to deal with them. So don't go away. Take a short break. We're coming back shortly.
Knowledge is power. Information is liberating. Education is not just preparation for life. Education is life in itself. Great education does not only deliver creative thinkers, problem solvers and innovative minds, but also individuals who are physically, emotionally and spiritually sound. Gospel Light College offers holistic education and much more.
This course has shaped us. I, for once, as a pastor, I'm now well prepared, able to present the gospel in the right way.
My life has been transformed, my ministry has been impacted, and I'm going out there not only to impact the community, but to impact nations.
Such no more. We offer a bachelor's and master's degree in biblical studies and community development, certificate in theology and ministry. We also offer academic writing classes. The January 2023 intake is ongoing. Book your slot today by calling 0748 00 6112. Gospel Light College, a Christ-like worker for a Christ-like church.
Welcome back. This is the Gigi report, and we are back to the discussion. We're talking about the problem of developing Africa and how trade, in particular intra-Africa trade, can actually spur development within the continent. Before we went to the break, my guest, Kezy Mukiri, you were talking about you know, this the agreement and the details that are in this agreement. So I think we can spend a little bit more time and break down this intra-Africa trade. And I think off the break you mentioned that there are 3 dimensions to it. So maybe we can start from there.
Okay. So the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, what it does is to create a single market.
Okay.
54 countries. We have one that did not ratify Eritrea.
Okay.
But we have 4 countries, member states. That single market becomes the largest trading bloc in the world outside of the WTO.
Okay.
We've talked about the market size, 1.1, and it is projected by 2030. Africans will probably be 1.5 billion.
And majority of them young.
Yes. That's the other thing, which also gives us a sustainability projections for, you know, what it is that we are doing. About 70% of our population is classified
we are the youngest continent
as young. Yes, with a median age of 18, 19 years. Now, the agreement, what is unique about it? It goes beyond the elements of a traditional trade agreement. Most traditional trade agreements focused on trade in goods.
Okay.
The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement goes beyond goods to also make provisions for trade in services, to talk about investments, and to also talk about intellectual property.
Okay.
Because the lack of protection of intellectual property has been a hindrance to many people. You export, and you know, Africa has struggled. For example, now we know that the trademark for the kiondo, which was an African invention, Africa no longer owns it. It's owned by some country out there. The Maasai shuka as well. This is our intellectual property, but it's been patented, and you know, it's the intellectual property is now owned out there. So it's essential. We say that intellectual property is a core. It must work together with trade development. But the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement does not work alone as an agreement. There are some other essential components that will buttress it and enable it to succeed. One of them is a protocol on free movement of persons.
Okay.
Because for you to trade effectively, we need to break down the barriers.
Yes.
We need to actually focus in a borderless manner.
Yes.
So there is a protocol on free movement of persons that regulates, and you've seen it work very well. Actually, the East African community is a case study, is an example, because you can now go across East Africa with just your national ID. You don't necessarily have to have a passport to move. We now also have more countries in Africa providing for visa on arrival.
Right.
Those are initiatives that are
including, and maybe our viewers should know that South Africa did actually take a very, very bold step recently, and I think from January allows Kenyans to travel to South Africa.
Particularly business travelers.
Yeah, business travel, 90 days, 3 months, visa on arrival.
Yes.
Which is absolutely amazing.
Yes. So besides that protocol on free movement of persons, another critical one is what we call the single African air transport market.
Okay.
You will notice that it's very expensive to travel within Africa.
That is true.
Particularly if you're in East Africa and you want to go to North Africa, we have routes where you have to detour through Europe and then take a connecting flight from Europe back to North Africa.
Yes.
So there is initiatives around easing our travel infrastructure, reducing those difficulties, making it more efficient, because infrastructure is necessary.
Absolutely.
For trade. You've
Yes,
also
yes.
seen the corridors, the road networks that are spanning across different countries, which is meant to ease the movement of goods.
Maybe while we are on that, the infrastructure, has the protocol addressed, for example, some of the some of the countries that are far behind? Congo, for example, very, very difficult to travel within Congo or even into Congo and reach all the regions because there is I mean to understand there's a dire lack of actual roads or railway lines and stuff like that. Are some of those problems being addressed?
Yes, you know, the challenge has been that underdevelopment has served certain interests.
Okay.
So there are areas on the continent that have been left intentionally underdeveloped because it serves the paymaster.
Okay,
You know,
okay.
it's-
So we can leave that on the side.
Yes, so remember I said that the conversations around trade will always have undertones of international politics.
Yes.
Around them. So now we have this agreement that facilitates trade. The question now becomes, what can we do as a continent to leverage? And maybe even before that, I can talk about some of the initiatives, because there's been a lot that is being done by the African Union Commission to educate people on, there has been a lot of engagements at country level. Kenya has taken the lead. Kenya was one of the very first countries to ratify the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Kenya is also right now in a pilot program that was launched sometime late last year, 2022, that is piloting actual trade among six countries. So we saw Kenya flag off tea.
Yes.
You know, we've seen Ghana participate. We've seen countries begin to flag off. There is an actual movement so that we now get out of paper and get out of theory and see actual trade happening on the ground. Besides that, there's been a lot of sensitization workshops. Every country was required not only to domesticate the law, but also to provide a list of preferred goods, or how do you, which areas
Yes.
are you going to start? And tea, for example, is one of the preferred goods for Kenya. But beyond that, every country was required to institute a national implementation committee. And Kenya has already done that. Kenya has a national EFCFT implementation committee in place. I am talking about these things because there has to be activity outside of a trade protocol. We have some good protocols, good trade agreements that have failed, or we were unable to actualize their potential because they have failed to be actions.
A small community in Africa, even here in Kenya, wanted to participate, maybe an SME or some of the entrepreneurs, young people. So we are giving them, for example, the Hustler Fund. So can they actually leverage that and take their goods, even if it's just across to Uganda, Tanzania, Congo? I hear it's now all open and stuff like that. So what are some of the practical things that Kenyans can leverage, like immediately, and make some money?
This is the thing. I keep saying, even if you're running a local business, you cannot have a local mentality.
Yes.
You must have a global perspective, even to succeed in running a local business. So open up your mind to the opportunities that exist beyond your village.
Yes.
Open up your mind to the opportunities that exist beyond your small locality. There is a market that awaits you. Begin to think about quality, the quality of your products, standardization, because you see, just because markets are open does not mean you can move products that do not meet required standards.
Yeah.
So, and Kenya, for example, has a lot of infrastructure for trade facilitation. We have the Export Promotion Council that has a whole infrastructure on, to provide market intelligence, what goods are needed, where is there a market for what kind of goods. They even have a program that supports with packaging of products, so that then you enhance how your products are packaged. We at Ignite Trade Africa run a program for SMEs that are looking to go into export markets. So open up your mind to knowledge. I keep saying that without knowledge, you will suffer even when there are opportunities around you. So open up your mind. I personally believe, Gigi, that the way that God will help Africa is through trade.
Okay.
Opening up the market so that people can trade. So now if we have the ideas and we package those products, there is opportunities for trade. Now, trade in services. We have a young generation that's very tech savvy. There is no limitation as to where can you work right now.
Okay.
There is we have a borderless market. So we have a lot of young people who are providing virtual services, working in Europe, but they sit in Nairobi. So open up your mind to what services can you offer around the globe. For women, particularly, let me say women have played a significant role as far as trade is concerned.
Right.
In fact, if you look at the Proverbs 31 woman, there are many elements of trade in there.
Yes, yeah.
But women traditionally within the continent of Africa have pioneered intra-Africa trade.
Yes.
Because if you go to each one of our borders, women constitute over 70% of what we call CBITs, cross-border informal traders. They have small informal businesses, but they are moving products across the borders every single day.
All right.
So
yes.
now the solution, and I'm privileged to serve as well as the Global Vice President for Programs at the Organization for Women in International Trade. One of the initiatives there is to build aggregation centers.
Okay.
Because one of the challenges for SMEs, and you know, Africa is an SME-driven economy. So we cannot talk about trade and leave out such a significant constituents such as the SME. So one of the challenges has been the volumes.
Okay.
You know, so if you're producing at very low volumes, by the time you cater for the cost of logistics, packaging, getting certifications and standards, by the time you market that product, you find that you have eaten into your margins.
Yes, exactly.
So what then is a solution is for countries, and Afrexim Bank has pioneered a project to build what are called EPCs, Export Promotion Centers.
Yes.
So what it stands for is, but what it is, it's an aggregation center.
Okay.
That allows you to bring your, like what happens in the tea sector. We know the cooperative system.
Yes.
You bring your 50 kilos, I bring my 50 kilos. Within no time, we're exporting a ton of tea. So the same is starting to happen, being pioneered by organizations such as OWIT. Build aggregation centers that allow these women to bring in their product. Then we can get certification for all of us. So the cost of certification and you know, getting the standards is shared.
Absolutely.
The logistics cost is also shared.
And you know, the other thing, you know, we can mention, Kezy, to the people watching, if you have eaten some oranges bought from Githurai, they are likely to be from Tanzania.
Yes.
And onions.
Yes.
So, for example, and that's a very straightforward, you know.
And the eggs.
And eggs.
From Uganda.
So we are saying that we actually already have these infrastructures. There are people who are playing in that field, intra-Africa trade. But we're saying that their potential is way, way bigger. Instead of just taking oranges from Tanzania, maybe they can come from Congo, maybe they can come from Central African Republic, maybe they can come from Zambia or Mozambique or wherever they are in abundance. Essentially,
as you're producing, if you're farming legumes, for example, farm or produce with the continent in mind, not just your locality, which therefore means enhance your capacity. Look beyond, you know, what you've traditionally supplied to. There is a market in Malawi, there is a market in Ghana, in Central Africa, in, you know, South Africa. Start to think beyond the locality. But at a national level, and maybe even for us who are entrepreneurs, some of the things we need to quickly think about. And these are opportunities that are coming from the challenges we have encountered in the past. The first one is export diversification, which is very important. And this we talked about when we were talking about having remained too long with certain markets.
Yes.
Negotiating only with certain markets. We need to diversify our exports. The reason why you diversify is to cushion yourself from price shocks.
Yes, exactly.
I'm sure you noticed, you know, with the changes around COVID,
yes,
borders being closed, our horticultural sector
Suffered, actually.
Really suffered. So you want to diversify. You're not just exporting to one market. You're not just exporting one product.
To Netherlands and London and what have you, Europe actually in particular for flowers.
Yeah, that's why we must begin to think, what can we export to Africa? Because in Africa, largely our borders remain somewhat open for certain parts of the continent.
But while we're on that, before I forget, do you think that honesty, for example, in terms of if I shipped some bunch of flowers to some important partner in this one of these African countries that will remain unnamed, but that's a term we use just to say we don't want to embarrass that particular country. How are we dealing with the problem of trust, payment, certainty? Because Europeans will pay, Chinese, I think, do pay. There are problems within Africa. Traditionally, you ship at your own peril.
There are certain, I'll call them connotations, nuances around how we do business with one another.
Yes.
And actually, lack of trust has been one of those things that has held the continent back for the longest time. You have certain places where they're still not comfortable doing business with. We have profiled each other in particular manners. Within the continent. But when it comes to international trade, I tell individuals, you are exposed. The same way you're exposed doing business locally, there's certain levels of exposure.
Yeah.
When you're doing global trade, your level of exposure is now at a global scale.
Yes.
So your due diligence is really important. You must do your due diligence. Make sure you have proper agreements in place. So we do have legal instruments that we use to secure our exporters so that when an order is made to you, you don't just rush to package and supply. You need to make sure you have certain legal instruments in place.
And for example, LC's commitment across interbank commitment on their side.
On their side as well.
So cite LC documents, payment upon citing of documents and stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So you leverage the mechanism, the trade mechanism that exists, or the trade infrastructure with your financial, with your lawyers, with your trade consultant. You don't just jump because your level of exposure heightens. It's higher.
Yes.
It's way higher. So that's also something we need to be careful about. So I talked about export diversification. The other one is what we call sophistication of products.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to enhance the value in your product. We don't want to just ship raw materials now.
Yes.
We want to enhance value, and this is even a call for our governments. We need increased investment in the manufacturing sector.
Yes. Because
we want to enhance value. And then, of course, the other one is economic diversification. And this is looping in everyone, the SMEs, the women, the different people groups supporting with the aggregation centers, so that we have everyone participating in this.
What are the political bottlenecks perhaps that are being ironed out, hopefully, and apart from the prejudice we have, for example, mentioned, that's a cultural, social issue, but what about politics, proper politics? Are there challenges on that front?
Yeah, because the aim of the agreement, as I said, is to reduce tariffs.
Yes.
So, there was the feeling, especially by the bigger countries, that there will be more disadvantage. There is a preferential treatment for smaller exporters. So, and that's why you saw Nigeria, for example, took very, very long. Being the largest economy in Africa, took very, very long to commit to the Africa continent.
Or to ratify.
To sign into it.
Yeah.
It took a while. But now there is a greater political goodwill. There is also an understanding of the seasons and times, plays a great role.
Yeah.
There is an understanding that there is a shift, even globally. There is a shift and a focus on the continent of Africa.
Yes.
The next frontier, it was called the next frontier for a very long time. It is the now frontier. In terms of providing labor for the market, Africa now we have dying populations in the West.
Yes.
But we have a population that's alive and kicking and young and strong for the market. So Africa is also starting to realize the potential it holds. You've had African leaders now being able to stand up to leaders in the West and say, no, We don't want to be exploited, or we no longer want to trade as an equal partner. So there is a coalescing of minds on the continent. So, and that's just to say that there is more political goodwill
now than there was
there has
a
been,
few years ago.
Than there has been. And I also think even as more young people, SMEs participate, of course, we also now realizing, even at a national level, we're now realizing for Kenya to grow, for example, we have to increase our export ratio. Where do we go? So there is that internal push also coming from within the countries that, entrepreneurs want more opportunities.
Okay.
Across the world, more markets. There is an appetite for more markets, and that, of course, has pressure on the political class.
You're very big in the events market. I mean, that's how you got exposed to the international trade. What are the opportunities in that particular as part of the services? Trade, actually.
Yes.
If I wanted to organize a conference in Lagos and, for whatever, can I make some money, or I'm
absolutely dependent? And I will tell you why. Every transaction, commercial transaction, starts with a meeting. Every meeting is a business for those in the events industry. Every meeting. I play in the role, in the space of business events.
Okay.
So, and then also, because trade is such a facilitator for transfer of knowledge.
Yes.
These conversations, there is more, and also as economies shift and the world is getting different, people are meeting more to figure out what do we do, to brainstorm, to think through the next course of action. That is an opportunity for those in the business events sector.
All right.
What we provide is a professional service. If you view it as a professional service, then this agreement is for you. And I'm really passionate about those in the services sector, because the ease of entry into international trade is much easier for those of us in the services sector, because you don't need huge volumes of capital.
And there's no challenge of weight issues. If you're exporting semen, it's not the same as exporting some banking services.
No,
those are two different things.
Of course, there is still some things that have to be tied together.
Yes.
In terms of the certification, freedom to practice. For example, I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya.
Yes.
If I wanted to practice in certain other parts of Africa, there is a limitation because I may not be certified to practice in that market. So there are things that are being tied together in that protocol that then remove those barriers.
So you can
trade.
actually, you can be admitted into the South African bar, for example.
That is the intention. So
Yes.
that then we can actualize trading services.
Right.
But there are certain services that don't require certification. For example, I'm able to practice or to deliver my event management services across the continent.
Yeah. Plus, even if it's arbitration, for example, you can do,
Yes.
if there is a trade agreement or if you're dealing with an intra-trade business contract, and as long as you have the international certification in general, you should be able to arbitrate that, and that is actually business across Africa.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So the key thing is let people open up their minds and see that we have a play field that's way bigger.
Okay.
If I tell you you have a market of 1 billion people, you will stop producing as if you're only serving 5,000. And you will stop competing with your neighbor unnecessarily.
Right.
You need to cast your eyes beyond the shore.
Okay. Kezy, what else are we not talking about when we think about this whole developing Africa, and dealing with all the past problems? Is there something else that perhaps is escaping people's attention?
I think it is. So we've painted this picture. First, we've talked about the challenges. Where are we coming from? Why have we not developed? And then we've painted this rosy picture that we have this opportunity that stands before us. The thing is, what do we need to do? Because there is work to be done. Every opportunity comes dressed in overalls.
Yes.
There
it
is
looks
work.
like work.
Yes, there
Yes.
is work that must be done. Trade policy. I will mention them very fast, 7 things that we need to do very quickly. Trade policy needs to be enhanced. Every country needs to look very keenly on what do the trade policies look like. They need to be policies that are pro-trade, not policies that hinder trade. It needs to be a policy framework that is supportive of innovation, because we want people to innovate. We want people to accelerate production. So looking at every sector and having policies that are pro-trade.
Okay.
Number 2, trade facilitation. This is where now we reduce the non-tariff barriers, the discrimination, for example, for women, the harassment at the border points. You know, we need to be very firm around facilitating trade.
Okay.
Creating an environment that allows people to trade.
Yeah. So I know we could go through into that long list, and it's a bit we're running out of time. I think what you can do in the interest of time is speak to our audience, church people, people with dreams, people with ideas, young people, and speak to them and call them forth, you know, so that they come to the conversation as we wrap up. Because
this is what I would say. This agreement is for you. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is for you. And you need to play a role. You need to come to the table. You need to take a seat at the table and play a role. Every church, I believe, needs to have programs for entrepreneurs. It must be that way. Because how else do we exercise dominion? It must be that way. We must figure out how are we trading, how are we moving across the borders. As we trade, we help communities. Actually, one of the easiest ways to impact on communities is through business and entrepreneurship. Young people, this is your time, this is your day, this is your moment. You're no longer the future, you're the now. The Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement exists for you. Enhance your knowledge, figure out what role can you play. There's an opportunity to enhance your skills. Actually, that's the biggest opportunities for governments and even for churches. Enhance the skill of your people so that we can all move together forward.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, we got to bring this to a close. Thank you very much for staying tuned in. I have been your host, Godfrey Gichuki. I hope you have enjoyed this show. We will see you another day, same time, same channel. Keep it Elevate TV and keep sharing this, and we'll see you another day. God bless you. Have a great evening, day, night, wherever you are, and God bless you. Bye for now.